Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Virginia Pomolli. I run the Security and Development Program here at IISS. This is the third in a series of monthly events that we have been running on issues that are at the convergence of security and development. In September, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon warned the UN General Assembly that the world was living in an era of unprecedented levels of crisis. The past 3 years have certainly been particularly violent, with the civil war in Syria, renewed emergency in Iraq, intercommunal conflict in South Sudan and the Central African Republic, the eruption of violence in the Ukraine, and not to mention increasing violence in Nigeria and the crisis in Mali. And as the world is becoming more violent, more people are fleeing their homes, creating a growing number of internally displaced people, but also marking an increase in the number of those leaving their countries and seeking refuge elsewhere, including Europe. This trend, as you know, presents a number of challenges, and some of which we are going to discuss today. To do so, we have two extremely qualified speakers today. We have first Minister Vincenzo Celeste, who is the Deputy Head of the Italian mission here in London, who has previously worked at the Department for European Policies and also at the Italian Embassy in Damascus for 4 years. As you know, Italy is the front line of migration flows into Europe, and Minister Celeste will outline the Italian experience with Operation Mare Nostrum and then Triton. Then we'll hear from Andrej Mahecic, who's a Senior External Relations Officer at UNHCR here in London. He's a former journalist with extensive experience in the Middle East and throughout Africa. Mr. Mahecic will focus on refugee movements and forced displacement. But at the end of the two presentations, we'll have time for Q&A, and so I'll open the floor for discussion. But first, I'll turn to Minister Celeste for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Virginia, and good morning to everybody. Thanks for your kind words. I actually, of course, here in London, we are mainly observers of this phenomena, which are, of course, of great importance for Italy and for the European Union as a whole, if not, and including also for the countries which are bordering on the southern shores of the Mediterranean. Actually, my intervention will be divided in I will have a short introduction, then I will focus on three main aspects. The first one is on the operational aspects for the inflows of migrants and what was our experience. The second one is the dialogue, increasing dialogue with third countries, including the migration dimension in the external relations with the European Union. The third one is just a few words on the common asylum system in Europe. So I will start from very simple geographical considerations. Italy has a coastline of more than 8,000 kilometers. We are deeply projected south in the Mediterranean. On the east, only the Adriatic Sea separates Italy from the Western Balkans. In some segments, as you probably know, only 80 kilometers separates the Italian shores from the Albanian shores. Looking at south, only 70 kilometers are dividing and separating Pantelleria and Lampedusa, which are the two extremely south Italian islands, from Tunisia and the North African coast. So Italy, in a way, is bordering on two regions which in different moments were and are today still the main source of instability for the entire regions. The Western Balkans at the beginning of the 90s and the southern Mediterranean today. It remains that, of course, this is not only the Italian border, but is the EU external border. Through Italy is the EU, which is bordering on countries like Tunisia or Libya and others. And massive migrations towards Europe via Italy did not start recently. Actually, when I joined the foreign ministry back in 1989, after only 2 years, I was appointed to the department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was there. I was a liaison officer with the Ministry of Interior when the first inflows of Albanian refugees arrived. I remember scenes that we have seen also recently. A boat with, it was not a boat, it was a vessel, a commercial vessel, with 20,000 people on it, just coming across from Albania. Already at the beginning of the 90s, it was difficult to distinguish those who were genuinely entitled to get a refugee status and the so-called economic migrants. And already at that time, Italy had claimed that this could not only be the problem of one member state in the European Union, rather it had to be treated as a common problem at European level, and that the bargain-sharing principle should apply. The turning point of this long story, which went on during years, has been certainly the October 2013 tragedy of Lampedusa, where probably you know, just to recall that 366 persons died in a sunk boat. After Lampedusa, the Council, the Justice and Home Affairs Council, the European Union, established a task force for the Mediterranean. Last July, in 2014, the Justice and Home Affairs Council has recognized that more solidarity among EU member states is needed, and that the borders of each member state are to be considered really as the EU border. And finally we arrived to the Council of October, last October, 9-10, where the EU member states recognized that it was necessary to strengthen the Frontex agency, and a commonly coordinating action under the aegis of the EU was necessary to tackle this problem, and that an individual member state could not be left alone to face it. The real innovation, in our view, in the outcome of last October Council was the adoption of a strategic approach towards migration. Italy played a role there because the document presented by the Italian presidency was adopted as conclusions of the Council, and this conclusion designed a multi-layer program for action based on three pillars. The first one is action in cooperation with third countries, which entails the integration of the migratory dimension in the EU external relations with countries of origin and transit. Second, a reinforced management of external borders by Frontex, which means the recognition that the border management of the EU, including search and rescue, is a common responsibility also at the operational level. And third is that action in the EU at member states level is needed to fully implement our common European asylum system, also through increased operational cooperation between member states. The Council asked the Commission, of course, to report to next December Council on the state of play of the implementation of these three actions. The reason I mention this is that, of course, we are at the beginning of a new phase, in our view, where for the first time there is a recognition that not only solidarity, verbal solidarity or financing has been put on the table in order to tackle this kind of problem, but also a shared responsibility in managing operational action. I will start from here, from the second pillar, of course, because this is because to face this situation, the Council, as you know, has politically endorsed the start of a new maritime patrolling operation as of November 1st, the so-called Triton operation. As you know, Italy has been at the forefront as regards the number of migrants arriving. If you look to the figures, there is an astonishing increase of people arriving to Italy. This number is a function also, of course, of two main problems. One is the political and crisis and conflict in the north of Africa and other areas of Africa. The other one is problems like famine and hunger that, of course, push people to flee. Triton operation is supported, as you know, with assets provided by a number of countries. I can list them if you want: Italy, France, Spain, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Malta, the Netherlands, Portugal, and also personnel provided again: Italy, Austria, Belgium, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovenia, Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, and UK. The mandate of Triton operation is mainly maritime patrolling and surveillance within a space of 30 miles from the Italian shores. Where necessary, Triton can carry out also search and rescue activities in compliance with international obligations stemming from international laws, and in conformity with the same rule of engagement of Frontex. As regards the Italian operation Mare Nostrum, as you know, it has ceased last October 31st. We have replaced Mare Nostrum with a new operation which is called Maritime Security and Surveillance in Central Mediterranean. This is a temporary operation. It lasts 3 months and which will flank the Triton operation and will be a phasing out from Mare Nostrum. This new national operation has a reduced dimension. It is deploying 1/3 of the assets of Mare Nostrum. It is meant to assure the transfer to Sicily of migrants rescued by Triton, and it's providing for the first sanitary checks and identification of migrants. This national operation so far is scheduled to cease on the 31st of December. There was a lot of talk about Mare Nostrum just recently, and indeed this was a large humanitarian operation, as you know, of which we are proud. It helped to save more than 100,000 lives at sea. But since the beginning it was conceived as a temporary humanitarian operation, a temporary operation. Above all, we knew that it was not sustainable in the medium long term. The cost of such an operation for our country has been of 9.5 million euros per month. Nonetheless, we consider Triton operation a very important political signal. As I was mentioned before, for the first time Europe has proved it can share operational responsibilities in patrolling the common maritime external border in the Mediterranean. We are obviously aware that neither Mare Nostrum nor Triton can solve the problems of migratory flows. In the medium and long term, the only adequate solution must be looked for in the context of the dialogue and cooperation with the EU with the third countries which are origin or transit for migratory flows. This leads me, of course, to talk of the other pillar, because it is clear that the stronger role of the EU in the Mediterranean is paramount in order to prevent new tragedies in the Mediterranean. As you know, the Italian presidency is committed to promoting a legal channel of migration and strengthening the tools for the prevention and fight against trafficking in human beings. The general framework of the external migratory policy initiatives at EU level is the global approach to migration and mobility. There are a number of instruments, tools that we have. I want to mention here especially mobility partnerships with some strategic Mediterranean countries such as Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, and in the future possibly Lebanon and Egypt. So beyond mobility partnership, there are also programs for protection in the country of origin or transit for migrants. We are, as Italian presidency, we took the opportunity to try to relaunch the Rabat process and to launch a new process involving the Eastern African countries, which we call the Khartoum process. The Rabat process is connecting countries from the EU, Western Africa, Central Africa, and the Mediterranean. In few days, next 27th of November, Italy will host in Rome the 4th Euro-Africa Ministerial Conference on Migration and Development. We are very pleased to know that the Foreign Secretary Hammond will participate in this conference, side by side with our Foreign Minister. The Ministerial Conference will focus on two key issues. On one side, the links between migrations and development, which means highlighting how migration can contribute as an enabling factor to the development of the economy of the migrants' home countries, thanks to remittances and diaspora's communities. This is something we as Italy know also because of our past. Italy was, till the end of the 60s, was a country of emigration from where Italians were going abroad. And this produced a lot of positive consequences for our economy in terms of remittances. And of course, there is the two key issues. Links between migration and development need to tackle the root causes of migrations, including environmental degradation due, among others, to climate changes and food scarcity. On the other side, of course, this dialogue is pushing all countries involved in the ministerial process to strengthen cooperation in preventing illegal migration, also through shared responsibilities in border surveillance, tackling crime and human trafficking, while respecting fundamental rights of migrants and developing programs of voluntary return of migrants and reintegration in the countries of origin where appropriate. The other process we are pushing, as I mentioned, is a process we are pushing following the indications of the October Council. It is our intention to start a similar parallel dialogue with Eastern African countries, which constitutes the main starting area from migration. The Khartoum process will involve countries of Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, Sudan, Eritrea, South Sudan, Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, the main countries also of transit of migratory flows, which originates from that region, Libya and Egypt. Of course, on Libya, I will say a few words just after. This dialogue will be focused on the fight against human trafficking, but in our view, in the future, all four pillars of the general approach at EU level should be extended to this dialogue. I just remember the four pillars are promoting legal migration, cooperating in the fight against illegal migration, exploring the links between migration and development, and assuring international protection. The first ministerial conference of the Khartoum process will be hosted again in Rome next November 28th, i.e. the day after the ministerial meeting of the Rabat process. Will gather the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of Home Affairs of participating countries. Again, we are very pleased to know that Minister Brokenshire, the Minister for Migration, will attend. In this context, of course, a special consideration has to be paid to the situation in Libya, which for a time was a key country in the management of migration pressures. Unfortunately, today we don't have interlocutors there, and it is not yet possible to start the cooperation targeted to prevent departures of migrants from the Libyan shores. It remains that we need to continue to work to help political stabilization in Libya. This will also be of great help to restoring a working partnership to deal with migration. And here I'm pleased also to add that there is an intensive cooperation also between Italy and the UK on how to stabilize and how to support the efforts of the United Nations in Libya for the stabilization and, in perspective, for the management of the migratory flows. Finally, I would say a few words on the third pillar. As regards reception and asylum policies, Italy is fully committed to play its role in the implementation of the common European asylum system. The system at European level includes a number of actions: harmonizations of criteria for granting refugee status, assuring the equal treatment of qualified refugees everywhere in the European Union, implementing norms which establish the state responsible for examining the application by an asylum seeker, the so-called Dublin III. We are aware of limits and criticisms towards Dublin III. Notwithstanding, today we think that member states are called to respect obligations which derive from the system. And in the case of Italy, this is especially true for identification of all asylum seekers who arrive on the Italian territory, despite the difficulties that this poses to our authorities. And we think that it is necessary to continue to work to strengthen the asylum policy at EU level. More harmonization of national systems is needed there in order to avoid that asylum could become a sort of pulling factor for migration. And in perspective, here I know that I'm mentioning something which is not shared by a number of European countries for the moment. We continue to think that in the future, the introduction of the mutual recognition of decisions on asylum within the European Union would be an unavoidable key step for the future. So this concludes my presentation. Of course, I will be more than happy to reply to questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Grazie. Virginia, mille grazie, signore Celeste.
Yes.
I'll speak. We've heard from Signora Celeste how it looks from the perspective of the country that has been on the receiving end of such a record numbers of sea arrivals this year. I'll speak more of the humanitarian and the refugee aspect of the whole crisis, for the simple reason it is of utmost importance to understand what is driving this and why such a record number of people are actually trying to reach Europe. We are looking at historically record levels of displacement globally. There are more than 51.2 million people in the world today who are in the situation of forced displacement. These include refugees, these include the internally displaced people who are in a refugee-like situation, if you like, but they haven't crossed the border. And this is also including the asylum seekers. Now, the reason we are at these levels, and the reasons why these levels are at their highest in the post-World War II era, is significantly driven by the conflict in Syria and also other conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa. But Syria has been one of the main drivers of what we are seeing in the Mediterranean today, and I'll speak a bit more about that. If these people were a nation, they would be, these 51.2 million displaced, they would be the 26th largest nation in the world. It is an illustration of the fact of the inability of the international community to bring old conflicts to an end, such as Somalia, such as Afghanistan, and I could name a couple of others, as well as to prevent the new ones. And this is what has largely driven the numbers up to the, as I said, to the record high. We have seen so far this year more than 190,000 people making the journey across the Mediterranean into Europe. Not all of them to Italy, but vast majority to Italy, about 160,000 people. The rest have come through Turkey, Spain, Malta, Greece. But it needs to be said also that of the 51.2 million displaced globally, 86% are being hosted by the developing nations. And I'd just like to compare this to a situation only a decade ago where this balance wasn't so obvious. And at that point, 70% of all the displaced globally were actually hosted in the developing nations. 30% were in the industrialized world. Speaking of the situation in Syria, it has now been the most dramatic humanitarian crisis in decades. For UNHCR, it is the largest humanitarian operation in the history of the organization. 3.5 years into the crisis, and Syrians are now the largest refugee group globally under UNHCR mandate. They have taken this record from Afghans who have held it for the said 33 years. And with 3.2 million Syrians now living as refugees, this has happened actually this spring, that they have become the largest refugee group globally. The consequences of this massive outflow for the neighboring countries are enormous, with economies, public services, communities and local population heavily affected, not to mention the impact of the security impact of the Syrian conflict on the whole region. Lebanon and Jordan have witnessed dramatic increase in population as a result of the Syrian influx, which has overwhelmed national infrastructure and services, exerted a heavy toll on public finances and created economic hardship for many among the host population, especially the most vulnerable Lebanese and Jordanians. In Turkey, the government has already spent, this is according to the Turkish authorities, $4 billion on providing protection and assistance to more than 1 million Syrian refugees on their soil. But recently, and the most worrying fallout of the Syrian conflict has been Iraq, which has now become entirely engulfed by the conflict, to the extent that it is now very difficult to actually distinguish between the two crises. The situation inside Syria can be encapsulated in 3 words. It's death, it's destruction, and displacement. It is estimated that 9.6 million of the country's pre-war population of about 23 million people have become displaced. As I said, more than 3.2 million live as refugees in the neighboring countries. Another 6.4 are internally displaced, driven by a ruthless conflict that has claimed over 190,000 lives since it erupted in 2011. Increasing numbers of Syrian families are arriving in a very shocking state, exhausted, scared, with their savings depleted. You have to remember that the Syrians who are reaching the border now have done this or are doing this as a last resort, because they can no longer sustain themselves inside Syria, because of the collapse of the basic services. The prices of food has gone up. In many places there is no drinkable water, etc. Many of them have been displaced over the past year more than once inside Syria before they actually aimed for the border into the neighboring countries. 3 out of 4 remaining Syrians in the country now live in poverty, and Syria's human development indicators have regressed by 40 years since the conflict started. Now, every day, the humanitarian workers inside Syria, over 60 of whom have lost their lives since the conflict erupted, and most of them being the volunteers of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, they face risks and threats to their lives, and they are the ones who actually enable many of the organizations and charities to be able to reach the millions of people and deliver urgently needed humanitarian aid. For example, this year alone, so far, the food has been provided to more than 4.1 million Syrians out of the targeted group of 4.2. The health has been delivered to 6.5 million direct beneficiaries, while 2.9 million children under the age of 5 were vaccinated against polio. However, whatever is being done on the humanitarian front inside Syria falls way below what the needs are. Let me just remind you here that the UN appeal, which has been the largest in the organization's history, is funded at 51%. We are now at the end of November. It should have been close to 80, if not 90%. Almost 11 million Syrians are living in the country are in need of assistance. Of this number, just for the winter, we know that at least 3 million will require urgent assistance. There is virtually every town and village inside Syria is either being affected by the conflict or is hosting a population that has been traumatized by what has been going on. It is estimated that more than 400,000 homes have been destroyed. Another 1.2 million homes have been damaged in some way. As many as 5,500 schools destroyed, 3,800 mosques damaged or destroyed. Most of the flour mills and bakeries are no longer operating. Hospitals offer no sanctuary for healing. 60% are damaged. 60% of all ambulances in the country are out of service. More than 15,000 doctors have left the country. Now you can only imagine what kind of impact this might have for those who have stayed behind and what kind of services they can get. Speaking briefly about Lebanon. Lebanon has suffered far-reaching consequences as a result of the conflict in Syria. The country's long-standing and deep-rooted historic, economic and social links to its neighbour have rendered it particularly susceptible to the impact of the spreading violence. The country currently hosts more than 1.2 million registered refugees. This is 25% of Lebanese population. The impact of the Syrian conflict to Lebanon's economy and stability far exceeds the scope of relief assistance. The latest assessment by the World Bank estimates that the total cost of the crisis to Lebanon throughout the end of this year will reach $7.5 billion. This is neither including the serious impact on employment, nor the demographic and political pressures exerted on the country's stability. The unprecedented scale and complexity of the crisis require more comprehensive remedies to address the huge challenges it poses on Lebanon. In Jordan, the influx of refugees into Jordan has reached critical level, requiring a targeted response to address not only the humanitarian needs, but also the longer-term consequences of the crisis. The country is currently hosting more than 618,000 refugees. These people are mostly in urban areas. There is a lot of footage has been seen around the world of the camps in Jordan, the Zafri camp, but this needs to be understood. This is the tip of the iceberg. And overall in the region, only about 20% of the Syrian refugees are being hosted and provided in the camps. Vast majority are either fending for themselves, living with friends, renting, coping how they can. In Jordan, the families and the communities hosting vulnerable Syrian refugees also face significant challenges, as does the Jordanian government. Meeting these challenges will, of course, depend on increased support from the international community as we move into the fourth winter of the Syrian conflict. In Iraq, as a result of the fallout of the Syria conflict, it has now, as I said, it became entirely engulfed to the extent that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish the two crises. In addition to hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees who already sought safety in the Kurdistan region in northern Iraq, more than 1.9 million Iraqis have been internally displaced this year alone. This is after the country has been recovering from a 10-year civil war. We are now back into the situation of a massive displacement inside Iraq. And let's not forget there are at least 180,000 Iraqi refugees abroad, many of them also still in Syria, who at the peak of the Iraqi crisis actually hosted about 1 million Iraqi refugees. Turkey, according to the Turkish government, as I said, $4 billion have been invested by the Turkish government so far in care and maintenance and protection for Syrians. And the needs are growing, especially in urban and rural areas outside the camps. Critical support is necessary, particularly financial assistance for the refugees, as well as for shelter, education and health. While a willing and generous host, Turkey should not continue to bear so great a proportion of this burden alone. As recent events has shown, any deterioration of the security situation inside Syria will result in Turkey receiving significant numbers of refugees seeking protection, food and accommodation, but the scope of that support will increasingly now depend on the generosity of the international community. I think the very blatant example of that has been the recent situation with Kobane, and when in the space of virtually a weekend, about 140,000 Syrians have crossed into Turkey. Coming to the Mediterranean, so far this year, 190,000 people have made the crossing. These are refugees and migrants. This is compared to about 60,000 in 2013, so it's more than threefold increase. Italy has received 160,000 at the astonishing pace, I think, of the average is about above 15,000 people per month, which you divided by daily arrivals, it's about 500 arrivals every day. Most of them being rescued at sea by Italy under its Navy Operation Mare Nostrum. Now, we estimate that so far this year more than 3,000 people have actually perished at sea or have gone missing at sea, including just since the beginning of June, 2,800 in that period, from June up until today. In comparison to the same period last year, about 600 have perished at sea. Almost half of the arrivals by boat are Syrians and Eritreans. If you add about 7 or 8% of the Malian arrivals, that essentially points to the fact that more than 50% of all the boat arrivals across the Mediterranean have been people who are fleeing either conflict, persecution, or human rights abuses. Among the arrivals, there is an increasing number of women, children and elderly who embark on these journeys, enlarging already a very large proportion of vulnerable people aboard these unsafe boats. And so far in this year, over 18,000 children have also arrived by boat, mostly to Malta and Italy, by sea. And this number, 18,000, includes 10,000 of those who are unaccompanied, which means they are either separated from their families or they're essentially on their own. In terms of what we have been urging the international community to do, because of the dramatic situation at Europe's sea borders, it demands urgent and concerted action with the overall objective of saving lives. First of all, it is to strengthen the rescue at sea operations. It is to ensure that the long-established tradition of rescue at sea is upheld, maintaining a strong capacity for search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean, including with support of the EU and other member states of the UN. Europe needs to increase legal alternatives to such dangerous crossings. If you, from time to time, you have a chance to read some of the testimonies of the Syrians that have made the crossings, these people are now in a situation where the protection in the region is no longer available. The neighboring countries are saturated to that extent that many of them are now, and this is the biggest threat for the Syrian situation, are not capable of taking any more, and they are managing their borders. The protection capacity in the region is diminishing. The situation in Egypt has deteriorated for Syrians immensely since the change of the regime. And then if you add what has happened in Libya and how basically the collapse of law and order in Libya has further contributed to the movement. There are refugees and even people who might have been there as a third country nationals and work, who might have stayed if the situation was stable, but it was that element of the insecurity and instability and violence in Libya that has also pushed them towards crossing. As I said, Europe needs to increase the legal alternatives to such dangerous crossing. This could include increasing resettlement quotas, humanitarian admissions programs, access to humanitarian visas targeting populations in need, who are now resorting to unsafe sea routes while seeking safety. States can also facilitate family reunification, as many of those arriving by sea are seeking to reunite with family in Europe, and use private sponsorship schemes. In addition, states could use programs such as student and employment visas, because there is something profoundly wrong when the people who are fleeing one of the deadliest and worst conflicts in recent history have no alternative to reach safety in Europe but to take these boats. And the third key issue that we have been asking Europe to do is, and the wider region, to provide access to asylum and solutions for those in need of protection, because many of those arriving have fled their homes, as I said, due to conflict and violence and human rights violations, and they need protection. States should provide them with adequate reception facilities, adequate reception conditions, and swift access to asylum procedures. There needs to be robust systems in place that can identify those who need protection from those who don't. And these systems need to satisfy the legitimate interest of the state to maintain border security, but at the same time be able to identify those who are in need of international protection. Additional initial reception facilities and assistance in processing, as well as identifying durable solutions, could be potentially established with the EU support. And I'll stop there. I think I've taken more than my
Thank you very
share
much.
of time. Thank you.
I'm sure I'm not the only one just to feel overwhelmed by these figures and the seriousness of the crisis that the world is facing and the suffering of the people, but also the challenges on the part of receiving nations in Europe. I now like to open to the floor for discussion. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand. And please, could you please also introduce yourself? Thanks.
Peter Asprey, I'm a member of the Institute. Can I ask about trafficking gangs?
Trafficking?
The guys who are carrying the refugees across the water. In the Horn of Africa, as I'm sure you know, that there seems to have been a nexus between guys who are trafficking people, trafficking guns, trafficking drugs, piracy, and so on and so forth. Trafficking is part of the general breakdown of law and order. And I wonder if you see a similar kind of breakdown of law and order on the water in the Mediterranean in the future.
There's clearly a link, of course. I mean, these illegal traffickers in Mediterranean. Unfortunately, this is one of those. Let's call not profession, but I mean, kind of work that which is very easily convertible because it depends on the rentability of the of the traffic itself, illegal traffic itself, and of course, with the Syrian conflict with the gigantic dimensions which were just explained, this of course has encouraged for sure traffickers to involve it, to increase a lot this trafficking. Just think that even prices, to our understanding, even prices went down. The passage would cost $1,000. So this is again a proof, and it is not the case that one of the feature of Triton operation, for instance, has been agreed that also the boats which have been taken by the authorities should be destroyed, because this is one of the also of the assets which the availability of which encourages to increase traffic. I don't know if
I don't really have much to add to the law enforcement part because I know nothing about it. But what is clear is that, first of all, with the breakdown of the law and order inside Libya, you have a vacuum that has been used, which, if you like, was meeting the demand that existed simply because people suddenly felt not being safe any longer there. And there are likely there people who would have stayed in Libya if they felt safe. However, for Syrians, it is very difficult to make that assumption because for them the situation has really got worse, and especially the situation in the neighboring countries and those who are currently in Turkey. There are those who are making their way into Europe through Greece and Bulgaria. And the recent discussion about the the end of the Mare Nostrum operation and whether the continuing of that would be a pull factor. I mean, we would argue that the numbers have already been in their significant rise before the Operation Mare Nostrum was put in place, and it was put in place after the tragedy off the coast of Lampedusa last October. Equally so, in the seas between Turkey and Greece, there is no search and rescue operation, and the numbers have been going up there as well. But having them in place is of course, we are concerned that in the absence of such an operation that where Italy has virtually saved tens of thousands of lives, the death toll will go up. More people will undoubtedly perish at sea, and that has been, I think, if it's just enough to go through the most recent headlines, and there is no shortage of the news of the boats capsizing or shipwrecks. Thank you.
Jenny, you had a question?
Hi, Jenny Tavares from the International Committee here across in the UK. Thank you very much, Mr.
Mahic,
it's fine. For your kind of very positive description of this humanitarian consequences of the situation in Syria, and as you probably know, we work extensively in both the kind of source countries and in the sort of reception countries in southern Europe, working with the Spanish, Italian, Greek and other Red Cross societies, and to support them, and also with our own office in Athens, dealing with some of the more unfortunate consequences of this trend, for instance, forensic identification and restoring family links. Thank you very much for your messages on how the situation could be improved. Do you have any message for development and humanitarian organisations who are working on this issue and how they might support some of these processes?
Which process in particular?
You said you've been urging states to, for instance, strengthen legal protections and so on. I wanted for humanitarian and development organisations.
Well, I mean, certainly the NGO and the humanitarian community is an important partner, and they can be of massive assistance in providing the legal aid, providing the boosting the capacity of the authorities and so on. There are many volunteers who are active. I'm sure in Italy, Mr. Celeste could speak more maybe about it. But it is primarily the responsibility of the authorities to deal with that. You've mentioned the forensics. Also, I'm not sure, for example, how many of those who have perished at sea have been properly identified, whether there have been cases also of families claiming the bodies. My understanding is most of them are buried actually in Sicily or somewhere in southern Italy. But certainly there is a massive role for the NGO and development sector, in particular in the region neighbouring Syria. And I say this why? Because at the moment every fourth dollar that we have, 25% of our funds are spent on the projects that should be actually covered by the development actors. And there is a lot of manoeuvring space, and this is something where we have been also advocating for the support of the governments to get more involvement of the development actors in support of the countries that are in the immediate neighborhood of Syria, to look at the infrastructural issues, the services, etc. Let me just give you a very illustrative example from northern Jordan. I've recently visited one of the hospitals there, and in the maternity ward there are 16 incubators. Okay, 12 of them had Syrian babies in them. Another 2 were occupied by the twins of the Pakistani couple who was on their journey through Jordan, and the remaining 2 were occupied by Jordanian babies. And there was a queue of Jordanian mothers, expecting mothers, asking the doctors, well, if I deliver early, where will my baby go? And certainly this is just one example of many where the development actors could do so much more, and where the humanitarian funds are then dispersed for the humanitarian needs rather than trying to also meet these infrastructural issues, which are of course a major burden on the hosting communities. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, I can see there are a few people who would like to ask questions or make comments, so I will take them as a group. First, the lady over here.
Thank you very much. Ines from Metascars. I'm also a member of the Institute and a PhD candidate and researcher at the LSE. My question is to Mr. Celeste and points made about British-Italian cooperation in the area of political stabilization in Libya. Last very moment. Would you be able to comment a little bit on that, both with regard to what is happening at the moment and also with regard to what you envision in the future?
Okay, Antoine.
Antoine from the IWS. You both highlighted huge to-do lists for governments and the EU. But I was wondering whether in the, however small successes which all the EU and other governments have recorded in recent years, if within those successes there have been any significant policy innovations which, however small, would be something which could be expanded upon, and something which could also apply to other situations where cooperation between countries are necessary and in the case of threats.
Okay. David?
George Lombracus, I'm a retired American diplomat, and I wondered if we can concentrate for a moment on the mobility agreements that you mentioned. This is the first I've heard of them in this discussion, and I was wondering how effective they are in reducing the flow, certainly of the economic migrants, but also of the refugees. And if you already have agreements with Morocco, Tunisia, and Jordan, the moderate states, and hope for Lebanon and Egypt as well, that really leaves only Libya, as far as Italy is concerned, and perhaps Turkey. I see you shaking your head. And so the question then becomes, how can you control this through these mobility agreements, and how effective are they anyway?
Okay, and David?
I thought it was interesting that protection is one of the key words you mentioned. I'm not an expert on refugees by any stretch of the imagination, but I think Europe's record has been fair. It's been fair. With some singular exceptions, notably the United Kingdom, being bad. But the snag is to protect, whether it's in the Mediterranean or in Eritrea or Somalia, you need popular support back home here, and also the government of those states to accept it. No one, with any stretch of the imagination, can imagine Eritrea saying, we're going to change our government because there's a problem for Italy. This bigger term, I think it's an American term, cannot be turned off. These people are going to continue to flow out for whatever reason for the foreseeable future. If all the Syrian refugees decide they're not going to stay in Jordan or Turkey and decide that the only place to go is Canada, the United States, and have to come via Europe, that's what they will do. The thing which I'm surprised neither of you mentioned is most of these people have actually got money. They pay to be trafficked. They are different from a lot of the Asian refugees who pay when they get here. These people, as I understand it, pay to be trafficked, however much it costs. The snag is, and I speak as a Brit from outside London, is that, I hate to say it, but we don't want all Syrians here. And I think the government was unwise, I said to Virginia earlier, to make any comment after the Italian announcement, because it rather made it as if it was a terrible decision. The Brits were effectively saying, let them drown. But as much as I agree with protection, there are tens of millions of people who want to leave their countries in developing and conflict regions. There is no end to it. I just very, very pessimistic, Andrea Vincenzo, as much as I admire what the Italians have done. But Europe appears to be moving in a direction which is there is protection and letting people in. And I just can't see it. It's a conundrum I cannot see getting out of it.
I think the last person, the gentleman over there.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. I'm also still an ambassador here. And, well, first of all, also I would like to also thank both panelists about the overview and situation in complex regions. And we today concentrate more about the possibilities of refugees and economic migrants from Africa and Iraq, Syria, etc. But I would like to know if there are any studies from UNHCR about new complex regions or new migrants or refugees. And then, for example, from Ukraine, we are talking also about the possibilities for the EU and European countries are supporting them not to leave the country and build out there. But we know already that there are too many displaced people internally, and it depends very much on the winter and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, well, it was mentioning the question of mobility agreements between Turkey, for example. I've been also in Greece last year, and I saw, let's say, the good work of Frontex, and of course, but it very much depends on the other partners, the other side. And if there is no will, or will is very weak, then I'm afraid, well, there will be no possibilities to cooperate in this respect. But thank you very much indeed once again for the overview.
Okay, thank you everyone for your contribution. I'd like to come back to the panel. Who would like to?
Maybe I can start to pick up some of the points. Cooperation between UK and Italy in Libya. Yes, I mentioned, I confirmed that there is an intensive cooperation. As you probably know, the Italian embassy now is the only embassy open in Tripoli, so in this moment, and is the Italian ambassador there is our also envoy for Libya, and is supporting the work of Bernardino Leon, the UN envoy, and we are doing so, I mean, in close cooperation with the British envoy, which is Jonathan Powell. Of course, there the situation is volatile. There are two camps mainly. And the problem is that there is no choice then to have them to agree on a stable settlement, and our role can be only one of facilitate this kind of confidence building measure. I mean, there is no pre-act solution that we can impose there, but it is something which has to come from the ground and from a confidence building measure process. Our Prime Minister, when he came here in the beginning of October, he also mentioned our readiness as Italy as soon as, and this covers a little bit also the problem of protection in a way, our intention, our readiness, not intention, in the moment that the political situation is stabilized in Libya, if there is an agreement at United Nations level to have a UN mission there, we are ready at Italy to offer to lead it in order to also to establish centers for and with the UNHCR, centers for protection of the people. The problem in Libya is particular because it's not mainly the Libyans who are fleeing. This is a corridor which is open and which is just receiving people from Horn of Africa mainly, and so there might be a lot of possibility to try to manage this inflow of people coming from the rest of the country, of the continent. For protections, of course, I think there's a difference always to be done between the protection that you have to offer to refugees according to the Geneva Convention 1951, which is of course a convention which has been signed by every European Union country, and the protection for displaced people who are in a way in a different position, or sorry, displaced for economic reasons. I mean, people who would leave anyhow their country, not especially because they are persecuted in their own country. For those who are genuine asylum seekers, we have figures which are astonishing, and the UK is among the first 5 countries, together with Germany, France, Italy, and Sweden, to welcome Syrian refugees. It is only a minor number as compared to the numbers that Andrei was just mentioning before, but it is something which is due according to the international law. As regards the mobility partnerships programs, it is something new. I mean, something which has been the first agreement has been signed in 2013. So we are now starting with Morocco. The lead is not, of course, it's not the Council, not Italy, of course, it's not the Council, but it is the Commission to lead these contacts. And now, to my understanding, there are, for instance, in the case of Morocco, which has been one of the first ones to be signed, the focus is on the visa agreement in exchange for a readmission agreement. It is an established pattern within the European Union while approaching countries who have a strict visa regime to negotiate possible easing or facilitations, but only in exchange of a regime of readmission which is monitorable, and with precise engagements. For the lessons learned, probably the most important lessons learned we have is exactly the fact that we need, of course, we had, as European Union, we have a long-lasting experience in dealing with African countries, with developing countries. We never paid attention to the migratory dimension, probably because it was not so important. It was not so important as it is today. I have to say, in this case, the UNHCR probably would confirm the situation is very volatile. If you take the figures, if I take the figures for Italy, in 2010, in Italy you had not more than 4,000 people arriving. 4,000. Already, it started 2011. There was a huge number of people coming. So I have the numbers here. Because of the Arab Spring in Tunisia, it started 11,000 in 2009. So 11,000. In 2011. This number went up to 64,000 because they were mainly Tunisians. It went down 15 to 1,900. Then we started to have the repercussions of the Syrian crisis, which led to the numbers today. I repeat, probably the main lessons we have to learn, and we are trying to do it, is to include migration and migratory problems within the ordinary toolkit of the EU external policy. I think this is also very clear to the High Representative today.
Okay, just to put things in perspective, out of 3.2 million Syrian refugees, Europe is hosting about 165,000 asylum applications have been submitted by Syrians in Europe. That's less than 4% of the overall refugee population that the region is hosting. The important element with Syria, as with other major refugee crises, is this, that most of these people desperately want to go back home. Syrians will go home tomorrow if there will be peace and stability inside the country. And the solution for that lies in the political domain, lies with those in position of power and those who might influence them. There is no humanitarian solution to this. So short of some political solution tomorrow, this flow will continue because the violence in Syria at the moment is only getting worse. We have seen the departure of 2 UN Arab League envoys in frustration. The third one is now in place. We are hoping that some dialogue will come forward, because only that will end the suffering for Syrians. And most of the Syrians, like that has been the case with many or most vast majority of the refugee situation in the world, people will go home, and people will go home very fast. The problem is that what you will see in Syria is that there are, if you compare some of the satellite imagery, for example, from late 2012 and late 2013, in late 2012 you still have beautiful cities, recognizable parks, avenues, streets, and so on. You look at the pictures from 2013, and this is as if you are looking at the lunar surface. There is not a brick left on the brick. I saw a school in Syria that the only thing left standing was the doorframe. So one has to bear in mind the context from where the Syrians are living. Most of them will want to return home once it's possible. But in the meantime, you have to bear in mind that there are people in the neighboring countries who need protection, who need life-saving protection, and who, if they stay where they are either at physical risk, because have no illusions about the capacity of the conflict inside Syria to reach out across the border. Just take the examples of the people who might have brought very important information about the human rights situation inside Syria. What might be their fate? What might be the fate of the people with serious, threatening medical conditions? And we are talking about the most vulnerable categories when we are talking about resettlement. We have asked for this strategically at the point where it became clear that the Syrian conflict is moving into a protracted phase. Why is that important? Because there will be then vulnerable categories such as these that need to be taken out. Otherwise, you risk their lives. And the issue here is simple. First of all, by providing a slot, either for humanitarian admission, call it whatever you like. It could be temporary protection, it could be a student visa, whatever. You are providing protection to a person. 2, you are actually easing the pressure on the neighboring countries, because I think it should be in the enlightened interest of Europe not to allow the whole region to cave in under the pressure. Iraq has already caved in. And when we are going to do the report for 2014, probably the numbers will be even further up than what we have for today. And lastly, it's not just a gesture of solidarity with the neighboring nations, but it's actually a very concrete help. It is one solution less needed in the region, and that's why it's important. Now, what we have strategically asked was for the first period, 2013 and 14, up to the end of 2014, for 30,000 slots to be made available globally. Our call is to all nations in the world, and many have come forward, predominantly European countries. In 2015 and 2016, we are asking nations to consider resettling or moving outside the region about 50,000 Syrians each year. And to that end, the High Commissioner has called for a ministerial level conference in Geneva on the 9th of December, where he will, again, this is a pledging conference. We currently, of the 130,000, that is the total, or the goal that we want to reach, So far, about 52,000 slots have been secured. But we will see as Syria goes into the fourth winter, the needs only rising. And at the moment, yes, there are many who are vulnerable and who simply cannot stay where they are. There are people who are also being identified as being in a vulnerable situation and in need of protection, who might say, no, I'd rather stay where I am. It wouldn't be the first time. But you need to open these avenues rather than taking the approach where if you're seeking safety, your alternative is the boat taking off from Egypt or from Libya. If you're a Syrian who lost everything in his home, and most of these people arrive with very few documents, if any. If your house has been bombed, you're fleeing for your life, these people arrive at the Jordanian and Lebanese border often without anything in their pockets. I've met mothers who, instead of picking up the paperwork, it was more important for her to carry a sack of flour and whatever oil she could bring, because she has 5 children in a tow and she knows that they need to eat tomorrow. But she doesn't have an ID or a passport or anything like that. So, and in the absence of any legal alternative, those who can't stay where they are, they will make that journey, and yes, if they can afford, they will pay for it. But that's the reality. In terms of the Ukraine, you asked, there are regular updates about the situation in Ukraine. We have recently warned that actually in the course of the summer and into autumn, the numbers of the internal displacement in Ukraine has actually doubled. We are currently looking at 430,000 internal displaced in Ukraine. In addition to that, about 207,000 Ukrainian nationals have requested refugee status in the Russian Federation. Another 180,000 of them have applied for some form of legal stay in the Russian Federation. And at the moment, there's about 6,600 who have asked applied for asylum in the EU, mostly, I believe, in Poland, Czech Republic, and similar. I don't really have much more to add.
Okay, well,
could you say something about the mobility agreements? You were shaking your head.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether we are talking about the readmission agreements or when you say mobility agreements.
I don't know.
I didn't shake head about mobility agreement, but the fact that we are faced with a situation in the region where the neighboring countries simply can't take it no more. You have had the op-ed by the Lebanese Prime Minister published a couple of months ago in one of the major UK dailies. The headline virtually says, "My country can't take anymore."
I understand that. We're talking about North African countries. We're talking about the mobility. Lebanon and Egypt are still in the future somewhere.
I wouldn't know about them.
And you're talking, I gather, mainly Ethiopian, Eritreans, or others coming. And I'm just wondering how effective that is as a way of controlling this in the long run. Now, you said it just started.
It just started, yes. I mean, this is something that you can imagine. Of course, in principle, all the 4 pillars I was just mentioning of the approach, I mean, the promotion of the legal migration, legal ways of migrations, prevention of illegal migration, paying more attention to the added value that migrants can bring to their own country, and also problems related to the international protection. All these aspects, in principle, are included in the political declarations which are at the basis of the mobility partnerships. So far today, as I mentioned before, what is starting at EU level, what we can deliver at EU level with this kind of countries, start with the readmission agreements versus facilitation of the visa system. But of course, it is a way. These are instruments which are targeting which are aimed at engaging these countries in a dialogue over these issues. It's not easy because some countries just do not recognize the existence of. In the past, they do not recognize the existence of such problems. So this is more or less the idea.
Libya remains the main weak point of all of this, from what I gather, and that's really where concentration has to take place. And of course, Italy and Libya, like France and Algeria, have a past, and therefore Italy gets most of the people from Libya, apart from the physical the fact that you're very much closer.
Which is not to be underestimated, because of course I repeat, the people who are coming from Libya are not Libyans.
No.
I mean, it's not the same case of Syria. There is no regime now in Libya. There is a conflict of probably everyone against everyone, although you can tell some two different groups now confronting on the ground. But I mean, the consequence is that traffickers, smugglers of human beings, are profiting of this chaos, and they have just increased. If you take the numbers, I mean, of the arrivals from Libya, astonishing. In 2010, almost virtually they didn't exist, and today everything is. I mean, as regards Italy, is coming via Libya.
Mr. Gaddafi is gone.
I mentioned the facts. Of course, Gaddafi was preventing his own people. He was killing himself, his own people, and so this was, of course, not acceptable, not tolerable.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We have exceeded the allotted time, but I think this is an indicator that this was a very timely discussion to be had. Thank you, everyone, for your interaction and questions and comments. But please join me in thanking our panelists.